My daughter-in-law called me the Leech Maid. She had no idea who really owned the company. After Douglas passed, I didn't want much. A smaller place, a quiet routine, and perhaps some closeness, real closeness, with family again. So when Kevin said they had space on the property, I agreed without thinking twice. The guest house sat behind the main home, shaded by dogwoods and flanked by Rebecca's tidy rows of hydrangeas. It had a blue front door and windows that caught the morning light. I remember thinking, this could be a good place to grow old. Kevin said it would be temporary at first, but then built a little stone walkway just for me. So you don't have to walk on the grass, he said, with that same boyish grin he had when he was 7. It made me feel welcome, needed even. Rebecca was polite, smiling as she handed me a spare key and said, "We're glad you're here, Sylvia." Really? There were dinners, warm ones. Roasted chicken, garden salads, the occasional bottle of red opened midweek. We laughed over family photos, and on Sundays, they'd take me to the trails near the Arboretum. Kevin always brought trail mix, even though none of us really liked it. It felt like something we were all trying to do together. But sometimes, small things would catch in my mind. Rebecca, watching me fold my cardigans too neatly, or commenting how I still handwrite grocery lists. Once, when her friends visited for brunch, I heard her pause as she introduced me. "This is Kevin's mom," she said. "Not Sylvia. Not my mother-in-law." Just a pause long enough to feel it. It wasn't cruel. Just a quiet coolness. A careful detachment that clung to her voice when we were with others. Like I belonged, but only quietly. One Sunday, as we cleared dishes, Rebecca laughed and said, "Sylvia's like our house fairy, always fluttering around behind the scenes." Everyone chuckled. I did too. But something in me faltered then, like a plate slipped just short of cracking. I carried the glasses to the sink slowly, her words echoing in my ears. House fairy. It stayed with me longer than I expected. The first time it happened, I thought nothing of it. My favorite sweater, wool, cream-colored, with a faint rose pattern along the collar, came back from the laundry with a faint pink hue. Rebecca apologized quickly, said something must have bled in. I nodded. Accidents happen. I folded it neatly and placed it back in my drawer, even though it smelled faintly of the detergent she used for the dog's bedding. Then it happened again. My nightgown disappeared entirely, only to be found days later in a pile in the garage, stiff with cold and mildew. "Oh, I thought that was an old towel," she laughed. I smiled. But I started doing my own laundry after that. My groceries began migrating. A bag of brown rice I bought vanished from my shelf, only to be found in a plastic tub in the basement freezer. I didn't ask why. I just made do with what I had left. My herbal tea was replaced with something labeled detox citrus. I drank it without complaint, though it made my stomach ache. There were other small things. The bathroom mirror, where I used to keep my floss and face cream, became cluttered with Rebecca's makeup cases and curling wands. My things were moved into a drawer I hadn't used in years. "Just so the space feels less cluttered," she said once. I nodded. I told myself it wasn't worth mentioning. At dinner, I began to notice Rebecca's small size. They were barely there, just the faintest exhale when I brought a casserole or set out placemats. "You really don't have to cook, Sylvia," she would murmur. "It's sweet, but, just rest next time." So I stopped offering. I brought books instead. Sat quiet, smiled when spoken to. Kevin never seemed to notice. He'd come in late, loosen his tie, pat my shoulder. "Smells great in here, Mom," he'd say, before heading off to take a call. One afternoon, as I sat by the window knitting, I overheard Rebecca on the phone with a friend. "No, she's fine, just always around. Like background furniture." The laughter that followed was quiet but sharp. I dropped a stitch, then sat very still. The next week, there was an awards dinner at Kevin's company. He was being recognized, something about a regional performance metric. Rebecca told me I was invited, but when I asked what time to be ready, she glanced at my outfit and said, "You're wearing that cardigan again?" It was soft gray, with wooden buttons and a delicate embroidery pattern I'd stitched myself. I just thought. She cut in, still smiling, but sharper now. Maybe just sit this one out. We'll say you weren't feeling well. It'll be easier. You know how those events are. I nodded. Slowly. Easier. That night, I watched them leave from my window. Kevin in his dark suit, Rebecca in a slim red dress. Her heels clicked on the walkway I once helped sweep after rain. I sat down at the kitchen table, turned the teacup in my hands, and told myself not to cry. It wasn't cruel, I thought. Just practicality. They were busy. They had lives. I told myself all the things women tell themselves when they're being quietly erased. But something inside me shifted that night. Not a decision. Not even a full thought. Just the smallest sense of withdrawal. A corner of me, curling inward, away from the light. I began waking earlier. Took my walks alone. Made tea and sat outside under the old oak tree behind the guest house. Sometimes I'd bring out the ledgers, old ones, from years ago. From before Douglas died. They were labeled Hawthorne Holdings. My name written beside his in fading ink. Rebecca never asked what they were. She thought they were scrapbooks, I think. She had no idea what I used to be. What I still was. She had no reason to know. Not yet. The gala was held at the Asheville Convention Center, glass walls, high ceilings, little lights twinkling from a chandelier that looked like frozen wind. Kevin had invited me himself, weeks earlier. You'll come, right, Mom? It'll mean a lot. I remember the way his hand squeezed my shoulder. I had taken care, that evening. Wore a navy dress, long sleeves, a string of pearls that had belonged to Douglas's mother. I didn't say much during the drive, just looked out the window as Rebecca chatted about seating charts and floral installations. Inside, the room was loud with congratulations. Clinks of glasses, shallow laughter, flashes from phones. I stayed close at first, smiling when introduced, shaking hands when offered. The table assignments were strange, mine off to the side, with the junior accountants. But I didn't mind. I'd learned how to be quiet without fading. After the dinner, people gathered around Kevin. He looked like a man at the peak of something. Rebecca stood beside him, elegant, poised, already holding a fresh flute of champagne. I approached from behind, meaning to say how proud I was. That's when I heard her voice, light, laughing, practiced. "Oh, this is Sylvia," she said, gesturing toward me with a glint in her eye. "Our little Leech Maid. She's always around, keeping herself busy." There was laughter. Not loud. But enough. I didn't say anything. I didn't even blink. Just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the clutch I'd brought, fingers curled around the worn fabric. Rebecca turned her head slightly, caught my eye, and smiled. Kevin glanced at me. His expression, tight, apologetic, but he said nothing. Just sipped from his glass. I excused myself. The restroom smelled like lemon and cedar. I locked the stall door and sat on the closed toilet, my hands folded in my lap, my breath slow and deliberate. I was not angry. I was not hurt. I was finished. That was the moment. No dramatic exit. No confrontation. Just a single breath in a quiet room, the sound of a paper towel dispenser whirring behind the wall, and the understanding that whatever illusion of family I had clung to, it had ended. I left early. Walked the 5 blocks home in flats, coat folded over my arm. The night air was cool. The sky low with cloud. I didn't look back once. Back in the guest house, I removed my earrings, one at a time. Set them carefully on the tray by the bed. Then I unzipped the back of my dress, folded it over the footboard, and sat down in my housecoat with a cup of water. On the table beside me were the ledgers again. Hawthorne Holdings. I opened the oldest one. The ink had bled slightly with age. But my name was still there. Sylvia E. Carter. Majority shareholder. That night, I did not cry. I made a list. The day after the gala, I made scones. Not as a gesture, just because I had flour to use and liked the sound of the oven clicking warm in the quiet. I didn't bring any to the main house. I didn't mention the gala. I simply left them cooling on the rack, wrapped the extras in parchment, and placed them in my freezer. Kevin stopped by that afternoon with a sheepish smile and 2 fingers of bourbon in a glass. "How's my favorite girl?" he said, as if the night before hadn't happened. I offered him a seat, made small talk about the weather, asked if the dogs were still chewing through Rebecca's throw pillows. He never mentioned the remark. I never asked him to. After that, I stopped waiting for invitations. I no longer slipped into the main house to straighten cushions or replace wilting lilies. When I brought groceries, I kept them in my own fridge. Rebecca's kombucha bottles had slowly taken over the upper shelf in theirs anyway. I used to sweep the walkway from the guest house every Saturday morning, leaves, pollen, whatever the wind left behind. I stopped doing that, too. Let it pile. Let it settle. No one noticed. Instead, I took to walking the older neighborhoods around Biltmore, where the sidewalks cracked and the houses had names instead of numbers. Douglas and I had once talked about buying a home on Old Waverly Road. We couldn't afford it then, but we liked to drive by slowly, windows down, pointing at porch swings and thinking aloud. Now, I walked those same streets alone. My cane steady, my cardigan buttoned against the wind. And I remembered. Each night, I sat at my desk under the little reading lamp, the ledgers open. I flipped through notes Douglas had left, quiet, precise handwriting, his initials always underlined twice. I had forgotten how thorough he was. I found a letter dated just weeks before his surgery. It said simply, "Sylvia, if you ever feel they're forgetting who you are, remind them." Quietly. I began writing again. Not letters. Ledgers. Minutes. Observations. I asked Martin Shaw, our family's attorney, to send me the most recent board packets for Hawthorne Holdings. No explanation. He responded within hours. "Of course," he said. "Your voice has always mattered. Let me know if you want to speak at the next meeting." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sorted through the documents like a woman unpacking herself. I read about expansions, share allocations, proposed partnerships. I read until midnight, tea cooling untouched beside me. Rebecca continued her usual routine. Book club once a week, though I never saw her bring home any books. Garden parties in the backyard with clipped laughter and glass drinkware. Sometimes, I'd hear my name from a distance, just a note in a conversation, casual and dismissive. "Oh, she's fine. She likes the quiet. She keeps to herself." And I did. Not because I was defeated, but because I was preparing. Kevin remained friendly, but distracted. Work, always work. He had forgotten, I think, that the company bore his father's name. That his seat at the table had once belonged to a man who built things with paper and patience and never once called his wife a leech. One morning, Rebecca passed me on the garden path. She nodded toward my blouse, cotton, pale yellow, a small pin at the collar. "That's sweet," she said. "Very vintage." I smiled. "It's from the year Douglas founded Hawthorne." She blinked, then laughed. "Of course it is." Later that day, I wrote Martin back. "I'll attend the next board meeting," I said. Not as a proxy. As the majority shareholder. His reply came quickly. "It's time." The boardroom hadn't changed much since Douglas first took me there, same long walnut table, same stiff-backed chairs that clicked faintly against the floor. I arrived early, as I always used to. The receptionist greeted me with a puzzled smile, asked if I needed to wait for someone. I gave her my name. Her smile shifted into recognition. Of course. Right this way, Mrs. Carter. Martin stood as I entered. He wore the same navy suit he always favored for serious days. They're not expecting you, he said, voice low. Only Kevin and the current board leads know. That's fine, I answered, smoothing the sleeve of my jacket. Let's not make a fuss. I wore a simple navy suit, the kind Douglas used to call steady clothes. Around my wrist was his old watch, the leather faded and worn from years of use. I carried no briefcase, no presentation. Just the ledgers. Just my presence. Kevin entered late, distracted, muttering apologies. Rebecca was already there, in a crisp blazer and bright lipstick, chatting near the head of the table. When she saw me, her smile faltered. Oh, she said. Sylvia. I didn't know. I'm here as a shareholder, I said, quietly. Not as a guest. Martin handed out the revised agenda. My name sat at the top of the second page. Rebecca leaned over to Kevin, whispering. He looked confused, then pale. The meeting began. Discussions passed over investment strategy, international expansion, a proposed acquisition. Martin cleared his throat halfway through and turned toward me. We'd like to revisit the expansion proposal into the Asia-Pacific market. The majority shareholder has requested a vote of review. Whispers rose. Rebecca leaned forward. I'm sorry, majority? Since when? Martin didn't answer. He looked to me. I stood slowly, rested my hands on the table. Hawthorne Holdings was founded by my husband. After his death, I retained his shares and quietly managed his stake. I've watched from the edges long enough. Kevin stared. You're the one who blocked the expansion last year? I nodded. It wasn't aligned with Douglas's values. The room stilled. Someone coughed. Papers shifted. I'm not here for revenge, I said, my voice steady. I'm here to protect what we built. And I won't be sidelined by anyone, family or otherwise. Rebecca stood quickly, eyes wide. This is absurd. You've been hiding this? Deceiving your own son? Martin spoke then. Calmly. Everything has been legal. Transparent. She's acted entirely within her rights. Rebecca turned to Kevin. Did you know? He shook his head slowly. No. I didn't. Her voice rose, brittle. She's been playing us. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The board voted. The expansion was blocked. Again. Afterward, I walked the corridor alone, ledgers tucked beneath my arm. Kevin caught up with me near the elevator. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, softly. I looked at him. My son. My boy. Your father wanted you to earn your place, I said. I honored his wish. He didn't speak again. Just watched me step into the elevator, the doors closing quietly between us. The days after the board meeting were quiet, though not in the usual way. Something cold drifted through the main house. Not a silence of peace, but of calculation. Rebecca stopped waving when she passed me on the path. Kevin avoided eye contact, murmuring vague apologies about work, then disappeared for hours. I didn't intrude. I baked a tart with the last of the late peaches and left it cooling on my counter. I took long walks in the early hours, when the grass was still damp and the birds hadn't begun their politics. It wasn't until Thursday evening that Rebecca showed up unannounced. She didn't knock. Just opened the door like it was still hers to enter and stood there, arms folded, face pale and pulled tight. So that's what this was all about, she said. The meetings. The ledgers. The quiet. I didn't answer. You've been manipulating everyone, she continued. All this time, pretending to be harmless. Like some sweet little widow with a teacup and a garden. Her voice cracked, not from sorrow but from disbelief. You deceived us. I laid my book aside, slowly. I protected what Douglas built, I said. That's not deception. That's stewardship. Kevin arrived a few minutes later, breathless. He hadn't even changed from work, tie still knotted, a folder under his arm. Mom, can we talk? Please? I looked at him. He looked tired. Not just from the meeting, but from years of forgetting his own history. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked. About the company. About the shares. About any of it? Because you didn't ask, I said. And because your father wanted you to lead, not inherit. Rebecca stepped between us. You've created a mess, Sylvia. The board's confused, the investors are uneasy. You're destabilizing everything. I stood then. My knees ached slightly, but I didn't show it. No. I've stabilized it. I made sure it stayed aligned with its roots. She scoffed. Roots? You think that gives you the right to override Kevin? I met her gaze. I think being the founder's wife and the majority shareholder gives me the responsibility to intervene when the company's legacy is being twisted into something it was never meant to be. Kevin opened his mouth, then closed it again. Rebecca looked to him, desperate now. You're just going to let her do this? He looked between us. She's not doing anything illegal. Or irrational. Rebecca turned toward the door, her heels sharp against the wood floor. This was supposed to be our life, she muttered. We supported her. Took her in. I didn't correct her. There was no point. After they left, I sat back down with my tea. Outside, the sky was turning amber behind the trees. I could hear the crickets beginning their slow conversation. They thought I'd been hiding something. But all I had done was remain still long enough to be forgotten. Now they were remembering, but not in the way they wanted. It was 2 days later when Rebecca returned, alone this time. She carried a bottle of white wine, the same kind she'd once called too sweet when I brought it for her birthday. Her eyes were red at the edges, mascara smudged faintly beneath her lashes, but her smile was careful, practiced. I didn't open the door fully. Just enough to see her. Just enough for her to know I was there. Hi, she said, holding out the bottle like a peace offering. I thought maybe we could talk. Let's forget all this boardroom drama. We're family, right? I looked at her, her polished nails wrapped around the neck of the wine, her hair pulled back like she'd just come from a spa appointment. Her voice was soft. Warm, even. But I'd heard that tone before, when she wanted to redirect attention, when she wanted to smooth something over without ever acknowledging the truth of it. We're family, I repeated, flatly. She nodded too quickly. Exactly. Let's not let this come between us. You called me a leech, I said. She flinched. Just slightly. Oh, that was just a joke. In public, I added. I didn't mean it, she said, the smile starting to crack. You know how things get. We were all just tired. Off guard. I didn't speak. She shifted her weight. You're being dramatic, Sylvia. I opened the door 1 inch wider. Not to let her in. Just so she could see my face clearly. Family doesn't humiliate each other for sport, I said. Her face twisted, just for a moment, into something sharp. But it vanished just as quickly. I don't want this tension between us, she tried again. I'm sure Kevin doesn't either. Then perhaps, I said, Kevin should decide what part of his life includes me. She blinked. And if you ever truly want peace, I continued, you'll stop pretending it can be bought with wine and half-hearted apologies. Rebecca's hand fell slightly, the bottle now dangling like something forgotten. You've changed, she said, and it wasn't meant as a compliment. No, I said, quietly. I've remembered. She stood there a moment longer, unsure. Then turned, her heels retreating down the stone path. I closed the door. That was the last time she came by uninvited. That evening, I made a simple dinner, poached eggs, spinach, a heel of bread warmed in the oven. I ate at the kitchen table, alone but undisturbed. Outside, the wind curled gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, Kevin's car engine started. He didn't stop by either. For the first time in months, the silence around me didn't feel like neglect. It felt like permission. It happened gradually, not all at once. A decision made not with urgency, but with steadiness. I called Martin and asked him to initiate the sale of my shares. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm choosing what to carry forward." He understood. He always did. The board was surprised but not resistant. A few asked if I was being pressured. I smiled and said, "No. I'm simply done sitting in rooms where people confuse my silence for absence." I signed the papers at the same walnut table where Douglas once signed the founding documents of Hawthorne Holdings. I used the same pen. The funds were transferred quietly. No headlines. No press release. I asked Martin to divide a portion into a trust, one earmarked for education initiatives, something Kevin once dreamed of before he became a man too busy to dream. The startup fund was established in his name. I made no mention of it to him. He would find it when the time was right. With the rest, I purchased a small cabin near Lake Junaluska. 2 rooms, wide porch, a patch of woods behind it that stays golden in the early morning. The realtor looked at me with surprise. "Most folks your age are downsizing into townhomes." I smiled. "I'm not most folks." The cabin didn't need much, just a kettle, a few books, and curtains that didn't close out the light. I bought them in pale green, the color Douglas used to say reminded him of the mountains in spring. I planted herbs on the windowsill and a single row of late-blooming tulips along the back fence. Most mornings, I walk down to the lake. There's a bench near the edge where I sit and write, not letters, not ledgers, just observations. Things like 2 herons fought over the same patch of water, or sunlight reached the tree line at exactly 7:42 today. I don't write for anyone. Just for the record. Just for myself. The days are simple. Tea. Reading. An occasional call from Rebecca's mother, who always liked me more than Rebecca did. I answer when I feel like it. I stopped measuring my worth in invitations. I don't speak of the boardroom. Or the company. Or the guest house. I speak of the wind, and the shape of clouds, and how silence can be gentle if you let it. There's a drawer in the cabin that holds the old ledgers. I haven't opened it in weeks. Not because I'm afraid, but because they've served their purpose. Douglas would have approved. He used to say, "What matters most isn't what you hold on to, it's what you choose to let go of." Sometimes I see Kevin's name in the news, industry publications, small accolades. I keep one clipping tucked into the back of a book. No bitterness. Just a note. A trace of something once shared. I haven't heard from him since the door closed. And that's all right. Some losses are quieter than others. But not all silence is sorrow. It was late autumn when the letter arrived. Tucked between a utility bill and a catalog I hadn't subscribed to. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar, angled, precise, a little too formal. Kevin's. I sat with it for a while before opening it. The lake outside was quiet, the trees nearly bare, their branches like reaching hands frozen mid-thought. I waited until the kettle finished boiling, poured myself a cup, and sat by the window. Then, slowly, I unfolded the paper. He didn't begin with "Dear Mom." Just my name. Sylvia. Rebecca filed for divorce. Said I changed. Said I stopped defending her. That I started seeing things too clearly. He went on, his words clipped but raw. He wrote about the company, how the board had shifted without him, how investors had started questioning decisions he once made with unchecked confidence. He said he found the paperwork, saw the trust I'd created in his name, the startup fund quietly waiting for his permission to bloom. "I didn't know you still believed in me," he wrote. He didn't apologize, not directly. There were no declarations of regret, no confessions about the years he let slip through his fingers. Just an observation. I think I'm just now seeing how many years we lost. I don't know how to undo that. I don't know if it's even possible. I read the letter twice. Then folded it again, carefully, and placed it in the top drawer of my writing desk. I didn't cry. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't write him back. Not because I was angry. Because I'd already forgiven him. The thing about time is, it doesn't erase everything, it just softens the edges. Like water running over stone. I could remember the sound of his laughter when he was 6, the way he used to sit on Douglas's shoulders and pretend to be a mountain scout. I remembered how tightly he held my hand at the airport when we flew for the first time, terrified and thrilled. I could love the boy he was, even if I had learned to let go of the man he became. Sometimes, I wondered if he'd drive out here. If I'd find his car near the edge of the trees, if I'd hear the crunch of gravel under his shoes. But he never came. And I never expected him to. Some roads, once missed, aren't meant to be retraced. They become something else. Not regrets. Not quite. Just quiet paths that turn inward and disappear. That winter, I chopped firewood slower. My hands, older now, took their time. I cooked in smaller portions. Wrote less. Listened more. And when the wind moved through the cabin at night, I didn't feel alone. I felt rooted. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping. But I was still here. It's strange how a life can shift around you and still feel entirely yours. Some evenings, I sit out on the porch in the thick dusk, watching the lake still itself. It takes its time doing so, little ripples, small currents, all eventually smoothing out. It's not dramatic. It just happens, as all things do when left alone long enough. The birds go quiet before the dark comes in full. That's when I hear myself most clearly. I've been living in the cabin for almost a year now. The tulips bloomed late but strong, and the herbs in the window have begun to dry into curling little ghosts. I haven't spoken to Kevin since the letter. I haven't needed to. I never lit the fireplace the way Douglas used to, it smokes too easily. But I've learned how to warm the place in other ways. Quiet, small rituals. Boiling water exactly when the sky dims. Brushing the dust off the windowsill in one slow pass. Placing my slippers side by side before sleep. It isn't much, but it is entirely mine. The educational fund remains untouched. Kevin hasn't made a move toward it, and that's all right. Maybe he never will. Maybe he'll live his whole life pretending the damage was mutual. Maybe, in his quietest hours, he will remember how many mornings passed when he could have knocked on my door and didn't. Sometimes, that's enough. Not the reconciliation. Just the knowledge that they carry the silence, too. Rebecca never wrote. Never called. But last month, I received a wedding invitation from one of her former friends, someone who didn't know, or pretended not to know, the past. I didn't attend. I didn't even RSVP. Instead, I made lentil soup and read old postcards Douglas had sent me during business trips. I liked that better. There was no bitterness in that space. Only pages, and ink, and time. In the closet, I still keep the cardigan Rebecca once dismissed, the one she called tired, old-fashioned. I wear it when I write. It smells faintly of cedar now, of stored-away winters and the kind of quiet that settles rather than demands. I never tried to explain myself to them. Not once. There was never a speech, never a confrontation. Just a steady pulling away, like dusk from daylight, like tide from shore. That's the thing about dignity, it's not loud. It folds towels in the same direction, even when no one is looking. It places spoons quietly in the drawer. It writes letters you never send. And it walks out without slamming the door. Douglas would have understood. He used to say people show themselves most clearly when they think you can't see them anymore. Now, I see everything. And I need to see nothing else. The world outside turns gold and then gray and then silver again, and I turn with it. No resistance. No grief, not anymore. Just a soft letting go. This morning, a neighbor stopped by. She brought plum jam in a jar with a handwritten label. We sat on the porch for a while, not saying much. She didn't ask questions. Just admired the view and offered a spoon. Later, as I washed the jar and set it on the windowsill, I thought, not for the first time, how peace doesn't arrive like a knock at the door. It's what remains when you stop waiting for someone to knock. And as the sun dipped beyond the hills, I poured a cup of tea and whispered to no one in particular. I wasn't a leech. I was the roots. And I'm done hiding underground.